Hello, dear viewer. Here is the full version of this wonderful story. I will not rant much in the full version, but I will say a couple of important words, after which I will start telling the story, analyzing the situation, and at the end we will summarize the overall result. Let me remind you that we have an exclusive community on Patreon, where we have long ago posted the full version of this wonderful story without censorship in video and text format, so you can follow the link in the description or in the upper right corner and already watch the full version. I will also note that this story is posted for educational purposes only, so that any of my viewers can think about the fidelity of their spouse and warn themselves in advance against bad consequences. Now I'm thinking we should get started. Unfortunate Wishes. Chapter 1. This is Mike. He's 38 years old and on his second marriage. The first ended peacefully when Jen decided she really wanted to start a family, even though when they got engaged, she agreed it wasn't what she wanted. Mike's father was a distant, aloof man, and Mike never felt like he'd learned how to be the kind of father his and Jen's children deserved. So they divorced, quietly and without rancor. If they met in town, they stopped and chatted like friends. And 6 months ago, Mike had sincerely congratulated her and her partner on the birth of their third child. Saturday night, Mike came in from playing cricket for the village team and found his wife Liz in the kitchen, checking that their casserole was ready by 7 o'clock. She told Mike he would have plenty of time to shower and change while she set the table and opened the wine. He came downstairs with time to spare and asked if there was anything he could do to help. Liz sent him to sit and watch TV until dinner was ready. When he was called, he followed the wonderful aroma into the kitchen, where a terrific meal and a glass of fine wine awaited him. When they sat down, Liz spoke up. "Mike, we need to talk." "Oh," Mike said. "That sounds ominous. You put fine food and good wine on the table, and then you say 4 words that never end well. Can't it wait?" "I think we've put it off long enough already," she replied. "Sure, we can have an adult conversation while we eat." Mike hesitated for a moment. He hoped he was wrong, but it bothered him that it might be something he'd thought about, but had given up on before he'd even proposed to Liz. When his parents died, he and his brother were surprised to discover just how much they had inherited. His father may not have been a warm man, but he was clearly a shrewd investor, and the brothers discovered that they each had access to hundreds of thousands of pounds, perhaps already millions, in trusts and investments in tax havens around the world. Mike used some of his share to set up businesses and real estate investments, and left the rest as a reserve for his old age. Mike was a generous man, but a cautious, no-nonsense fool. Fearing being victimized by gold diggers, he, determined to propose to Liz, hired an investigative agent to find out why her first marriage had broken up. He had already heard her side of the story, but wanted to hear her ex-husband's version. The sleuth said she'd had a conversation with her ex in the pub. He seemed like a nice guy, but cynical and disillusioned. His version of events was that his marriage seemed and had been fine for 6 years, and then his wife said they should take it to the next level and date other people. He claimed that he tried one thing once, hated it, and eventually divorced her. Mike considered what the detective had told him. It was probably true, but Liz was smart, lively, and beautiful. She was tall, 5 feet 10 inches, blonde, slender. Mike was under 2 feet tall, athletically built, well-to-do, and good-looking. They had many interests in common, and easily put up with interests they didn't share. Cricket was one of them. Eventually, Mike decided he loved her too much to let her go, based on the words of a strange man, and proposed. But just in case, he had also made provision for backups. One example was the house they were renting. It actually belonged to one of Mike's most modest trusts, but if they separated, it would not appear among his assets to be divided in the divorce. Liz claimed that she and her ex had divorced because he'd become complacent and boring and hadn't even tried to save their marriage. Mike wondered if the cycle would repeat itself since they'd been happily married for 7 years, but something had changed in her behavior over the past 3 months, and almost imperceptibly. Was he going to find out why? "So," he suggested, "while I eat, perhaps you can enlighten me. What is this conversation I didn't realize I was avoiding?" Liz finished her meal and took a sip of wine. "Well, it seems obvious to me, and I'm sure you've noticed it too. that our lives have become very routine. I think you'll agree that we need to do something to re-establish that very connection before we... She paused. Well, before we just drift apart. She took another bite of food and looked at her husband for his agreement. Do you offer couples counseling? He asked, barely keeping himself from laughing in her face. She did take him seriously. No, it bothers me that you're getting tired of doing it with just me, and I think you should have the opportunity to seek out women to sleep with outside of our marriage. Take it up with me, thought Mike. She sounds more like a con artist than a wife. What happened to the woman I married? He continued aloud. But I'm not interested in that with other women. What about you? Won't you be jealous if I do it with other women while you stay home alone? He continued eating. She may have been a fool, but she could cook. No, honey, she began, looking impatient at how dumb he seemed. If you're doing it with other women, it's only fair that I get to see other men. Mike noticed that the conversation was structured so that he was doing it, and Liz was dating. He would be attracted to the former and not discouraged by the latter. Either she had taken a marketing course or someone was coaching her. Are you saying you're bored doing this with me? He asked, feigning offense. You said I was a wonderful lover just last night. Did you just say that to spare my feelings? Liz was starting to panic. She was losing control of the dialogue because Mike wasn't sticking to the prepared script. No, honey, you're the best lover a girl could ever have. But I think we both need more variety to bring us closer together. Mike tormented her by continuing to eat, seeming to think deeply and for too long for her liking. So how is this going to work? He asked, sipping the wine. He made a note to buy another case. It was very good. It's not like I want to go clubbing to pick up women. All the women I work with know I'm married, and there's no way in hell I'm putting my face on Tinder where someone I know might recognize me. She recoiled slightly at the harshness of his last remark, but continued to stand her ground. His reference to Tinder had given her a chance. Then perhaps I can help. I think I heard the guy who works with me at the dealership talking about that thing. Perhaps, if I understood him correctly, I could discreetly approach him and ask him to introduce us to couples with similar problems. So, Mike's internal dialogue continued, there's a guy at work that she wants. We might do something like this because wife swapping emphasizes the reality that she's going to do it just like I do. And we need to do it because we have issues even though she can't say what they are. He thought some more as he finished his meal. He would miss her cooking if she continued this madness. He would miss her anyway, no matter what. Their marriage had been good so far as he could tell. You've barely touched your food, he remarked, standing up. Meet me in the study when you're done and we'll talk more. She cleaned up the kitchen, throwing most of the food in the trash can. Then she followed him into the room he used as his office. He was sitting at his desk with a notepad in front of him and a pen in his hand. I'm sorry to be so old-fashioned, he said, pointing to the pen in his hand. But I hate talking to someone while taking notes on the computer at the same time. She was at a complete loss. What notes? What are you talking about? Excuse me? His obvious bewilderment confused her even more. He continued, Didn't you just suggest I do it with other people? Well, yeah, but... And did you hear me say I wasn't interested in that? She tried again. Well, I know you haven't had time to think. He spoke to her. And surely that would be grounds for divorce. Not unless we both... He wasn't about to listen to what they both had to do. So it seems to me that you've already given this a lot of thought, while I've only now learned of your dissatisfaction with our marriage. In that case, as a self-appointed expert, you must tell me exactly what you propose we do and don't do. I will tell you which parts, if any, I agree with, and the parts I disagree with, I will change. If, and only if, we reach agreement on these terms, we will have an attorney prepare a document, which, duly signed and witnessed, will define the terms of our new, open marriage. He smiled at her. But if you do this to anyone but me before this document is signed, I will divorce you on the grounds of your adultery. She sat stunned, her stomach rumbling, and she was glad she'd hardly eaten. She'd suggested he find other women willing to do it with him, and he'd thrown it in her face and outright threatened divorce. Come on. His surprisingly calm voice broke into her thoughts. Let's hear your terms. You've obviously thought this through well. Unless He looked at her with deep suspicion. Unless you've been groomed by some predator in the workplace, and now you're just repeating the nonsense you've been slipped. Maybe you've already done this to someone at work, and now you're giving me a sacrificial ritual to make it up to me? By now, Liz was getting worked up. I swear I haven't had an affair with anyone but you since we got married, she told him, truthfully, as it really was. I just thought it would make our marriage stronger because we wouldn't have to cheat. I'm not sure I understand your logic, my love, but no matter. Now please, terms. Suddenly, her husband seemed like a stranger to her. She looked up and saw that he was looking at her expectantly, holding his pen at the ready. Well, she began, I'll find some couples who want to do this. No, no, no. He spoke to her again. There should be no euphemisms in a legal document. If you mean making love to each other's partners, say so. I cannot put my name under any feeble attempt to pass it off as what it is. I will not write what it actually calls it so you don't feel like an adulterer. She looked puzzled. I'm sorry, she said. I don't know what you want me to say. I needed a wife who took her wedding vows as seriously as I did. Apparently that ship sailed before I even sat down to eat. I want you to tell me what form you want our mutual infidelity to take, so please continue. She didn't think about ending it there, apologizing and apologizing for not realizing how much her idea, however well-intentioned, had already offended her husband. No, she was determined to act without thinking that the consequences might not be what she had envisioned. So, missing the opportunity, she continued, Oh well, I'll find other couples interested in something like this, and you can hang out with another woman while I'm with... No, 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 he stopped her again. With who? He demanded. Fucking with! Are you just going to sit at the bar with this man, or climb into bed with him to carry it all on there? Because if that's your intention, say so and stop pretending. Can we make a deal? Her eyes began to fill with tears of frustration, but he made no attempt to comfort her. She seemed determined to go on, so he didn't feel obliged to make it easy for her. He remained seated in the chair with his quill, waiting for her to explain the rules of the game. She took a deep breath and through her tears tried to start over. I'll find a couple who are interested in this. He was relentless as he broke in again. You'll find it? Come on, spare me the lies. You've already found someone, haven't you? You already know who you want, so do me the favor of telling me honestly. She had never seen him so angry and hurt, but she continued anyway, trying to make sense of her own confusion. There is a man at work who has asked me to perform this with him. I want to, but I don't want you to leave me. He said you wouldn't mind if his wife let you be with her. She doesn't mind doing it to make him happy. Finally, he said, True. But no, his voice was calm now. This is unacceptable. It's not what you really think it is. It's not the lifestyle I want. But at least there are rules here, and the participants choose their partners as a couple. In your bizarre fantasy, you're doing it with some random man you met at work, and I'm supposed to be just happy playing the same player's wife that he pimps out to induce other men's wives to do it with him? No way. Those are my terms. If you're so determined that you're willing to ruin our marriage by doing it with this man, then so be it. Do it with whoever you want. But you have no right to choose what I do. What about his wife? Asked Liz, trying to keep up. Are you fucking serious? What the hell do I care about your lover's pathetic wife? Meeting her needs is his problem? He objected, painfully aware that it seemed to have failed in his own marriage. So where did these meetings take place? I'm sure he instructed you on what to say. You'd meet her at the hotel and I'd go to their house, she snorted. Well, since I'm not going to go near her, it'll save me some money. I don't care where you do it with him or anyone else but our bed. If you ever do it with another man or woman in this bed, our marriage, whatever it may be, will end there, and I'll ruin him, you, your finances, and reputation. She looked at the man who had once loved her, and finally began to realize what she might have done, but still clung to the irrational certainty that all might be well once he got used to the fact that she had other men. All right, he said. You don't seem to have a very good idea of how infidelity works, so just piss off to bed, and I'll leave a copy of the adulterer's statute on the kitchen table for you to familiarize yourself with. If you have no objections, I'll try to have it signed by Wednesday." He turned to his computer and began typing, ignoring her presence. Liz wanted to say something, felt she should say something, but there was nothing to say. She quietly got up and left the room. She sat on the couch in the living room for a while, but when it became clear that Mike wasn't going to pursue her, she went to bed. She didn't sleep well that night, and although Mike eventually joined her in bed, he pushed her away when she reached for him. When she woke up, he was in the kitchen and out when she came downstairs. There was a note. "Hitting practice. Be back later, Mike." Not love Mike, just Mike. Next to the note was a sheet of A4 paper. It was entitled The Adulterer's Charter, and below it were paragraphs listing how they could be unfaithful. They read, "Either party may do this with any other person or people of their choice. Neither party will do it with anyone other than their spouse in the marital bed. Violation of this condition will result in immediate divorce proceedings. Each party must give the other party 24 hours notice of its intention to do so with a third party. If no notice has been received, the party receiving the notice may take action on its own without notice. Each party may spend only 2 evenings a week outside the marital bed. A week is the period from Monday to Sunday. Neither party is obligated to tell the other party who they can do it with, nor are they obligated to listen to the other party's accounts of their actions. Neither party is obligated to do it with the other person in order to satisfy the other party's ambitions. If a woman becomes pregnant, she and the father of the child must agree on a solution. The man is not required to recognize or raise another man's child. If the man gets another woman pregnant, he will also be obligated to find a solution." Note: prior to marriage, the man had a vasectomy. Although Mike had made it clear from the beginning that he didn't want children, Liz felt cheated when she realized that he had preemptively ruled out the possibility of her carrying his child. Perhaps a cynic would think that she was more concerned that she wouldn't be able to use parenthood to bind him to her. Sunday night passed uncomfortably for both of them. Mike didn't ignore her, but he had nothing more to say, and she didn't want to hear anything but an apology and a desire to abandon her scheme. Neither was offered. As she prepared for bed that night, she decided to wear the new negligee she had bought earlier in the week as part of her plan to seduce her husband into agreeing to try her new theme. She was annoyed to find that it still had the price label attached to it, and knowing Mike's moods, she didn't want to give him the chance to ask how much the nightgown or its contents cost. She looked in the bedside drawers for something to remove the label without damaging the delicate fabric, but then remembered that Mike kept scissors in the top drawer. She took the scissors and cut off the label. Just as she put the scissors back, she noticed a new box of something interesting in the drawer. When Mike walked into her room, she whirled around to face him. "Mike, you haven't touched me since we talked. I only want to make our marriage stronger. It's still me. Don't you want to make love to me?" He looked at her. She was as beautiful as ever, slender, firm, taut. Her silky blonde hair cascaded over her shoulders. The hem of her negligee reached mid-thigh. Mike walked over to the bedside drawers. Then he paused. "Do I have your word that you haven't cheated on me yet?" She flinched at the word yet. It reminded her that her husband still insisted that he thought her intentions were infidelity, despite her attempts to convince him that this was supposed to be a shared expression of trust and a demonstration of how much she loved him. "You have my word on that. Since we've been married, I've had nothing and no one but you." "All right, I'll think about it. And since you gave me your word, I won't use the stuff from that box." "What, this time? I thought they were for your women." She tried to understand. "Oh no," he replied, looking surprised. "There's another box in the spare bedroom for occasions like this. It's for me and you, if I can even bring myself to kiss you again after you've let other men do it. Do you really think I'm going to continue this with you after another man? There's medicinal mouthwash in the bathroom. Don't even think about kissing me again until I see you use it." He walked around the bed and over to her, where she stood in shocked silence. "Okay," he said. "Lie down on the bed." She was confused. She'd paraded in front of him in the most beautiful outfit she owned and had no illusions about how good she looked, and he was talking to her like a cheapskate. Almost in her sleep, she moved toward the bed. "Don't you want to take it off for me?" she asked hoarsely. "No, "I'm fine, you do that," he said, seemingly oblivious to her attempts to seduce him. He lay down next to her. "I apologize, but most of this scene was cut due to YouTube's restrictions on censorship in the video, so I remind you that the full version is on our Patreon. And believe me, the scene is very hot." For a fleeting moment, he felt sad that this might be the last time this would ever happen. He got out of bed, thanked her, and headed for the shower. She lay in a daze, emotionally drained. What was it? There was no connection, no attachment. She was sure he'd remember how good they'd been together, but no, he'd just used this moment as a release. He still resisted her gaze. Surely he would come to his senses eventually. Wouldn't he? Monday morning they got up as usual and had breakfast together. They hardly spoke at all. They left the house at the same time, even though they were traveling in different directions. He didn't even bother to give Liz a peck on the cheek. "I won't be late today." She took the coded message. "I'll show up as usual, and so will you. Otherwise, I'll make something delicious for dinner tonight. Have a good day," she said, trying to give herself a cheerful look. He only gave her a cold look and left. Liz arrived at the car dealership early and quickly found Gerald, 6'2", well-built, chiseled and confident, GED, her potential lover. She pulled him aside so they wouldn't be overheard by a post office employee. "How'd it go, babe?" He smirked. "He bought it?" "I'm not quite sure," she replied. "He insists on an open prenuptial agreement, and if I get involved with anyone before it's signed, he'll divorce me and ruin my lover." GED snorted. "What can he do to me?" Liz looked at him doubtfully. "He may not know that I know, but I'm sure he used his influence to get me this job. If he was able to get me through his buddies at the cricket club, he can probably get you through just as easily. Don't make him angry. He's acting very strangely now. As long as we get what we want, leave him alone." GED smirked and strode away. She hoped the confidence she found so appealing wouldn't make him do something stupid. She headed to the sales office to get to work, ignoring the scornful looks from some of her co-workers. When Mike arrived at his office in the graphic design studio he owned, he called his assistant into his office. "Ariana, please call Tim and see if he's free for lunch. If he asks, it's very urgent." Ariana lived with him for 8 years. When she became pregnant as a 19-year-old student, her family still called her Persian. She was practically disowned. Forced to drop out of school, she worked tirelessly at a variety of jobs to support her young daughter, and eventually took a job as an administrator at Mike's studio shortly before her daughter's 10th birthday. If she hadn't gotten pregnant, Mike thought, she would now have her own business. As a matter of fact, he had made her one. Instead of paying for office cleaning services, he had Ariana find cleaners among the families of people who worked for him. She found 20 people, mostly women, but there were some men who could use the extra money, and organized them into a non-profit enterprise that now provided cleaning services for the entire building. It cost him less than commercial services. The results were better, the employees were better paid, and his assistant gained experience in running a business. In addition to her brilliant mind, she had a knack for socializing and was stunningly attractive, although she was unmarried, as she devoted herself to raising her daughter alone. She was about 180 centimeters tall, had a slight build, and was in the habit of showing a little cleavage in the office. Her skin was such a shade that it looked like it was glowing, and her facial features would have been haughty, almost regal, were it not for the fact that she smiled almost all the time. Life wasn't easy at first, but she loved her daughter and her work. "Sure, I'll call Tim now and let you know." She left the room and he started up his workstation to check his journal. Okay, no big deal. He moved on to email. He dealt with the most urgent ones, reassigned other tasks to the appropriate designers and administrators, and put the rest aside. When he was done, Ariana returned to tell him that she had made reservations for him and his friend Tim, a lawyer, at a quiet local restaurant for 12:30. She said Tim was intrigued, especially since Ariana admitted that she had no idea why Mike wanted to see him. She tilted her head questioningly. He sighed. "Close the door," he commanded. She complied and sat down in the visitor's chair in front of his desk. She waited patiently while he gathered his thoughts. "That will stay in this office for now." She nodded, of course. "Saturday night, Liz told me that our marriage would be stronger if we could see." He made a finger in air quotes. Other people. I'm convinced that someone she works with made a move on her and she fell for it. So her bright idea is that she does it with him and he lends me his wife as compensation. Ariana said nothing, but her perfectly manicured raised eyebrow spoke volumes. So I made her a counteroffer. He considered whether to explain, but instead handed his draft agreement across the table. She read silently, then handed the sheet back. How was it received? She asked, smiling quietly. It was disturbing for her. She seemed to assume that she would have complete freedom to find men, and that I would be grateful to be allowed to spend the evening with any woman accompanying the transaction. She flinched at the image that arose and looked at her boss. What about you? She asked with genuine concern. He was a great boss and he made indulgences for her, a single mom that others didn't have. I won't pretend to be happy, but even after I told her I wasn't interested, she seems convinced that this is the only solution to our problems, so I've decided to let her see this nonsense through to whatever finale we come to, happy or otherwise. So, he said, putting his hands on the table, we have things to do. Mike arrived home at 6 o'clock as usual. Lunch with Tim went as expected. Tim sympathized and read Mike's draft. He promised to tweak some paragraphs to avoid conflicting interpretations and to add spaces for signatures of the spouses and their witnesses. The draft will be ready in his office Wednesday afternoon. Tim also had some suggestions for home security that Mike decided to seriously consider. Liz again cooked a fantastic meal, especially given the time available. That night, it was Italian food. Perhaps it spoiled the mood Liz had been trying to create when her husband informed her that the cheater's charter could be signed at Tim's office on Wednesday afternoon. Oddly enough, part of her resented the fact that Mike had apparently shared their situation with a friend. She didn't feel better when he reminded her that if she spent the evening with GED before the document was signed, Mike intended to divorce her for adultery. She felt sick to her stomach when she realized that Mike had called GED by his first name. What the hell else did he know? Mike complimented her on her meal, helped her clean up the kitchen, and then went into the living room to watch TV. He watched her amusedly as she tried to decide whether she should sneak a call to GED and risk a fight with Mike, or whether it would be better to wait until the next day. Frankly, Mike didn't care. In the evening, lying in bed, she tried to initiate, but her husband told her that thanks to her, he had had an unpleasant and emotional day, and he didn't need any more drama, whereupon he rolled over and went to bed. Tuesday followed a similar pattern, except that Liz told GED that Mike had somehow already learned his name. GED thought it was funny, but Liz didn't think it was very funny. Wednesday, strangely enough, went on as usual, but they each made their own way to Tim's office to sign the agreement. After the agreement was dated, signed and witnessed, Tim gave each of them a copy, and sealed and signed the third copy for his records. He looked at them sadly but made no comment. The couple drove home together, barely speaking. They stopped at a takeaway cafe, since no one felt like cooking that night. Liz went to bed that night as upset as she had been the night before. On Thursday, Mike called Ariana into his office during lunch. He smiled crookedly. Looks like my devoted wife is patient enough to wait until Friday night to take full advantage of our new marriage union. Feeling Ariana's gaze, he grinned. I asked my friend who got her a job if he knew what was going on. He didn't know, but he recently took on a new temp with no close ties to anyone in the company, and offered her a bonus to keep me in the loop. Apparently she's a really good worker, but she doesn't like Gerald at all. She actually called him a creepy dumbass. I'm afraid Liz seems to have pissed her off too, so she's asking innocent questions like, how long ago did Liz and GED become a couple? Apparently, that's already caused tongues to wag. Do you know what their plans are? His aide asked. Mike looked puzzled. You mean besides doing it like rabbits? Groomed eyebrows again. I meant, do you know when they plan to meet? Oh, not exactly. Apparently she was overheard ordering a cab to pick her up from her house at 6:30. I wonder if she'll make a meal for me. Please, Mike, can I help you make it so that it will be less of an adventure for her, and perhaps less of a hurtful experience for you, if she does go off and leave you alone? Mike looked at her, intrigued. She was a great assistant and a good friend. She also had a keen sense of humor. Damn, my marriage is about as good as my wife hopes for. Go ahead, but you mustn't break the terms of the agreement. Her face lit up. Of course. Oh, yes. And one more thing. May I have your copy of the contract for a moment? He handed her the copy with a questioning look, which she ignored as she left his office. Ariana returned 10 minutes later with the original document, securely rolled up in a sturdy cardboard tube. She also had 2 photocopies, which she had carefully laminated. I have a proposition for you, she said, sitting down. He waited, and she continued. If Liz intends to go down this path, it wouldn't be fair for you to deny yourself, and I can't imagine you'd want to go where others, perhaps many others, have already gone, so your home life won't be particularly fulfilling. I want you to own this situation. Don't let her and her buddy make you look like a cuckold. I want to put this up in our office so your employees know that your wife chooses what she does, and you, with her consent, are free to choose any woman who is interested in you. Mike looked unsure. Ariana continued. Half of your employees are women, half of the women adore you, and most of the rest would spend a nice evening with you anyway, just because you look good. You've never taken advantage of that because you're married and you're not that kind of boss, but it's true. Just say the word and I'll gladly do my job as your assistant and I'll serve as a good Cupid for many months. No, Mike replied, albeit reluctantly. As tempting as it sounds, I can't be the boss who takes advantage of my position. However, I agree with your suggestion to take the initiative. You have my permission to tell all employees that my wife and I are officially in an open marriage, so they won't feel uncomfortable trying to decide whether to tell me if they see her with another man. But don't share the details. I don't think it would help. But he pulled a sticky note from a pad on the table and wrote on it. Send a copy to this email address. Tell my media she can forward this to the dealership so Liz doesn't play the aggrieved wife card if she gets caught. She walked out of his office with a determined stride. Her boss, her friend, was suffering. Tonight she was going to call a special after-hours staff meeting, just for women. Mike was to learn that some women understood what fidelity meant. Then she had to make an appointment for Friday. That Thursday night, the atmosphere at home was chilly at best. Liz had prepared another great meal, but they both hardly tasted it. Finally, she mustered up the courage to say what she had to say. Mike, I've made plans to spend Friday night with a gentleman friend. I'll come home and cook a meal for you when you get back from practice on Saturday. I think that's in keeping with the terms of our agreement. Thank you for the warning, he replied politely. I can have my friend send his wife over to keep you company, she pressed, wanting to draw Mike into some sort of mutual agreement, trying to make him complicit. He looked at her sharply. We have discussed this. I have no interest in this woman or any of your other would-be conquerors. Do us both a favor and never mention it again. I won't let you misrepresent us. You want to do it with random men, which means I have the right to do it with other women. The difference is that I will limit myself to single women, as I don't want another man in my place. He ran out of the room, leaving her alone to clean the kitchen. When she finished cleaning, she went to look for him, but he was in his office working on his laptop. I know it's early, she purred, but I was wondering if you wanted to go to bed right now. And we could. Cuddle. He thought about it. He had a vicious idea. I'll tell you what, if you want to, do me one favor. For old time's sake, she cheered up. He must be coming around. Of course, darling, she purred, circling his desk. He raised his hand. Aren't you forgetting something? He asked. She stopped in place. Everything he'd said and done lately was confusing her. She was supposed to be steering him in the direction of a mature relationship, but he was twisting the situation at every turn. What was she forgetting? I don't understand, she said, on the verge of tears. You said I could, and now you're saying I've forgotten something, and I don't know what you mean. He smiled affectionately. I know our marriage is new to you. We're both learning as we go. You forgot to rinse your mouth out. Mike laughed at the thought that crossed his mind. Yeah, that would be an advance. Liz didn't laugh. Suit yourself, he said. Anyway, you don't have the right to do that until you've rinsed your mouth with antiseptic in the bathroom. Take your pick. And he went back to his computer. She was furious. He had done it again. He had humiliated her again. She had either walked away, giving up the idea of pleasing him to regain his favor, or humiliated herself by using mouthwash, tacitly admitting that she had somehow gotten dirty. How did he manage to do that to her every time? And the thing was, she still couldn't decide what the best thing to do was. While his wife was tormented, Mike was sorting out his finances. He practically emptied their joint accounts, scrupulously putting half the money into each of their personal accounts. If it came to a fight, she wouldn't be paying for a divorce lawyer out of his money. He made sure all the rent and utility bills were paid in full, and then cancelled all the cards in their joint names. Again, she could be responsible for her own expenses. He then sent his brother a letter, warning that their finances might be under investigation if Liz was smart enough to hire a terrier as a divorce attorney. Almost immediately, he received a reply sympathizing with him and offering any help he needed. He sent one last message, promising to report back in a few days. Liz was still in the living room, contemplating whether to blow Mike off on his terms or let him go without. Mike finished his business, closed his laptop, now password protected, and went to bed. Liz, still undecided, went upstairs, but the issue was moot. He was sound asleep. Friday morning, Mike was surprisingly cheerful, though there was no affection in it, and his leaving without giving her a goodbye kiss was the new norm. Liz was both excited and dreading this evening. She was facing an evening with another man after 7 years of living with Mike. What bothered her was that Mike was still difficult. If only he would let GED send his wife. GED said she would be willing to do anything. When she got to the office, she took the stack of documents that needed to be copied and headed for the photocopier next to Ged's place of work. She didn't notice the new temporary employee following her, carrying an A4 sheet of paper. Telling GE that she looked forward to their evening meeting, she went to the photocopier. Finishing her work, she smiled at the girl who was waiting after her. Before she knew it, the same girl had returned to the hallway empty-handed. Mike's day was a bit surreal. The night before, Ariana had briefed the entire female staff on the status of Mike's marriage. Everything was crystal clear. He ran the business. She, as his assistant, ran the office and would not let good intentions or vested interests interfere with the business. Their contribution was to help take the pressure off the boss and make the company run like silk. If any of the unmarried women wanted to comfort their boss, they went through Ariana. Married, engaged, or in a steady relationship, the women could forget about it. Their boss was not going to cuckold another man. No one objected, although a few wives sighed in disappointment. They loved their jobs, and it was Mike's attitude that made his office a great place to work. He didn't hire women or the disabled. No, he wanted people who could work as a team. What they looked like or who they liked didn't interest him. He had no time for the prima donnas, the pros, the front men, and other self-serving wastrels that filled many workplaces. His mantra was, work hard, fit in, and we'll pay more than the competition. If that doesn't suit you, don't let the door hit you in the ass on your way out. His employee turnover rate was 10 times less than the competition. That morning, Ariana gave the male employees a brief briefing. In the office, it was simple. Mike's wife was a goofball. He was a free agent. No offers to set him up with friends, exes, or sisters. His assistant was in charge of supply, and she wouldn't tolerate anyone forgetting it. Mike was surprised at how normal the atmosphere in the office was. He could tell that everyone was aware, but it seemed like they processed the information, filed it away, and just moved on. He did the same, and got to work with the rest of the team. At 4 o'clock, Ariana knocked on Mike's office door and told him she needed to leave early to run some errands. He wished her a good weekend, and she hoped his evening wouldn't prove too traumatic. He thought about it and rejected the idea of staying in the office until his wife left the house. He also rejected the idea of going to the pub for a bite to eat. Both would take away from solving the problem, something he couldn't stand. He arrived at 6 o'clock and found a simple stew in the oven, ready to be eaten when he was home. His wife called that she was in the shower and then going out on a date. Another euphemism. He was almost grateful when the doorbell rang. His wife shouted, "If it's a fucking cab, tell them they've arrived too early and they'll have to wait." He sprinted to the door, marveling at the perversity of his wife giving him errands so she could get busy preparing for the affair. As it turned out, it wasn't a cab, but Ariana and a young woman. He took another look at her. "It can't be," he gasped. Yasmin, is that really you? The couple smiled at his surprise. Yes, it's me, Mike, the young woman said. It's been a few years since we've seen each other, so I forgive you. I think it was my 16th birthday party, and I anglicized my name. My name is now Jasmine or just Jas. Ariana stepped in. So are you going to let us in or not? We need to get ready. Mike had long ago realized that it was usually smarter to do as she suggested, so he stood back and watched them enter, noticing for the first time that they were both dragging small suitcases behind them. Ariana looked into the living room. Okay, we're going to change in here. Close the door behind us. It made no sense downstairs, so he went upstairs to see if his wife was showing any signs of remorse. When he opened the bedroom door, it was clear to him that she wasn't. She was supposed to look like a leggy beauty. Instead, she looked desperate. She saw him watching. I'll wear this for you tomorrow night if you want, baby, she whispered. Then she pulled the ultra-short black dress over her head. Now she looked like a night butterfly. What the hell was she thinking? Still, he had to try to make it work for both of them. Liz, please think carefully. Neither of us have crossed the line yet. Don't walk away. We can put everything that has happened so far behind us. If you go to see him tonight, I have to tell you that I think you're making a stupid choice that won't end the way you hope. She looked at him with a patronizing smile. Eventually you'll realize I'm right. I'm just sad that you wouldn't let me find you company for the evening. Unfortunate wishes. Chapter 2. He sighed as he heard her answer. You told me yourself that you wanted to spend the evening with Gerald. As soon as you walk out the door, I will be forced to assume that you have chosen adultery over our marriage. At that point, you have to realize that I can do whatever I want with whomever I want. You know that, don't you? Are you absolutely sure you can handle it? Because whatever happens next is up to you, and only you. She began brushing her long blonde hair. Of course I'm okay with that. It's what I want for both of us. I promise it will make our marriage stronger. Mike only shrugged his shoulders in submission. He tried. The doorbell rang again. It was only 6:15. Liz looked flushed. Tell that asshole to wait, damn it. She walked into the bathroom, smiling to herself. For once, she was in control of the situation. Let's see him ruin it for her. As Mike was leaving the bedroom, a voice came from the front door. Mike, did you order a girl? Then another voice, probably from outside, seemed angry. Mike walked down the stairs, shaking his head. Tonight couldn't be pleasant, but he hadn't expected it to turn out so strange. As he approached the hallway, he heard Ariana's voice. I'm sorry, madam, but I can't let you in. You're not expected. She turned as she heard Mike's footsteps behind her. She bowed as he approached. Sorry to bother you, sir, but this lady insists you're expecting her, but she's not on your schedule. Ariana wasn't usually this submissive and uncomplaining in the office, but then she wasn't dressed in an outfit from some movie. Mike could barely take his eyes off her. She looked totally bloody, stunning. Her entire outfit seemed to be made up of huge patches of honey-colored material. The effect was far more seductive than the lingerie his wife wore. Trying to keep his composure, he looked at the thin woman standing on the doorstep. GED sent me, she wheezed. He said a nice girl nearby would help you calm down. Oh, he replied. If she's so good, why does he want my wife? At that moment, her eyes widened. Turning, he saw that Jas had joined them in the hallway, dressed as scantily as her mother, but in lemon silk. She stood with her head bowed, clasping her hands together in front of her. She was as much a vision as her mother. We await your pleasure, sir. May I serve you food? Whispered Jas. He could have sworn he could hear the blood pulsing through his body. However, he pulled himself together and managed to utter a coherent sentence. Yes, Yasmin. I'll be eating in the dining room today. Serve my food there and open the wine. Yes, sir, she replied. Then she bowed her head and slipped into the kitchen. He watched her back every inch of the way. May I help her, sir? Her mother asked in a sweet, sensual, submissive voice. Jesus, she was just like her daughter. Please, he replied, pleased at the unexpected turn and happy to play along with her. Ariana followed her daughter into the kitchen, covering her face with her veil as she went. Aha! he thought as it hit him. That's in case Liz comes down. She won't recognize them, and the rules say I'm not supposed to introduce them. He turned to the stunned woman at the door, who was trying to come to terms with the unexpected scene playing out before her. "I'll tell you what," he said. "My wife has a date with your old man, and I'm sure she won't mind giving you a ride home in her cab, because you're certainly not needed here." He let her in and told her to wait at the door. He went and found his Disney princesses in the dining room. They found Liz's spice kit and did something with the stew that took him out of his previous, rather mundane incarnation. Apparently, Liz had higher priorities today than satisfying her husband's palate. The food was beautifully served, the table was set, the wine was poured, and the ladies looked stunning, standing on the other side of the table, facing the door, and seemingly waiting for the opportunity to fulfill his every whim. That's exactly how Liz discovered them when she came downstairs. "What the hell is this?" she demanded. "Well, I decided to eat here today since I have guests," he said innocently. "You know what I mean." Her voice grew louder, as did her tone. There was only one thought in her mind. That bastard had done it again. "You said I could spend the evening with Ged's wife, and I said I'd rather choose my own women. Funny thing is, even though I told you I wasn't interested in his dripping seconds, she's standing in our lobby waiting to be dropped off at her her husband's with you. I've made my own arrangements, and after comparing my choices with yours, I've come to the conclusion that you and Gerald can keep her, and I'll stick to those two." "Who the hell are they?" she asked, clearly very angry. "Honey?" He smiled sweetly at her to further annoy her. "One's called To Hell With Everything, and the other is called Doing With You. You know, according to the agreement you signed to be able to spend evenings with Gerald." The doorbell rang again. He went back to his food, waving it away. "That must be your cab. Don't forget to take Gerald's wife back to his place. I don't need her." Liz stormed into the hallway in a rage and saw a thin, middle-aged woman with bleached blonde hair standing at the front door. The woman looked at her uncertainly. "Are you Liz?" she asked. "Because I have no idea who's who in this madhouse. I dressed up to have a good time tonight, because G.I.D. thought your boyfriend would want a good revenge." That was the final turning point. As Mike had said, no irrevocable boundaries had been crossed. But Liz was so consumed with her certainty that she had the right to do whatever she wanted to other men that she told the woman to button up her coat and then dragged her to the waiting car. There was an awkward silence in the dining room. Then Mike looked up and said, "Well, that was a lot more interesting than I expected." He smiled at the two women, who relaxed into their maid poses and grinned at him. Jazz spoke up. "Why was she dressed like a night butterfly? I thought she was on a date." Neither Mike nor her mother could come up with an answer that made any sense, so they just left the question unasked. Mike stood up. "Look, let's share the rest of this delicious stew, and then I'll give you both a ride home." Jazz looked at her mom. "Is he serious?" she asked. Ariana laughed at her confusion. "Yeah, but to be honest, I planted it on him too." She turned to him. "We're not going to let you take us home, because once you're back alone, all you'll be thinking about is Liz and GED. We'll stay to keep you company until tomorrow." Mike stared at her, trying to decipher the meaning of her words. Jas walked over to him and hugged him. It felt really nice, considering she was almost dressed. "Let's go to the other room. We have a favor to ask of you." They led him into his own house and sat him down. Jas leaned forward. "I've been offered a place at Edinburgh University to study medicine starting in October. That means in less than 4 months I'll be living away from home, on my own, for the first time in my life." Jas looked sadly at her mother. "Mom had the same opportunities I had, but I came along and she chose me over her education. She was so afraid that I would make the same mistake that, let's just say she was very protective of me." She looked at Mike to make sure he understood. "To be clear, I still haven't spent my evening with anyone now, and I don't want it to stay that way when I start university. When my mom told me about her plans for the evening, I asked her if she would let me use it as an opportunity. In the end, she said yes." Mike looked at Ariana, who gestured to their outfits. "That was the whole plan at first. To get into Liz's head so that instead of her thinking you were doing something with her lover's desperate wife, and I really feel sorry for the poor woman, Now, while Liz is trying to focus on Gerald, she'll be mentally picturing you with the two of us, and I really hope it completely ruins her night." Mike grinned at her outburst. She continued, "Then Yasmin came to me with this request. As her mother, I confess I was shocked when she asked me, but as a woman, I can see her charm. You are mature, experienced, attractive, and kind. I would rather she did the deed with you than as I did." She looked embarrassed. A drunken somersault in the backseat of a car isn't exactly the nostalgic experience a girl dreams of as a teenager. Mike didn't know what to answer and just looked at one and the other woman. "He's on our hind legs now," Jas grinned. "Should I keep going?" Mike looked helplessly at Ariana as she replied to her daughter, "You're doing fine, go on." And Jas continued, "Anyway, we brought it up, and on the way here, my mom confessed to me that she hasn't had another man since my dad left her. If your wife wants an open relationship, then you're free to fix that." "I can't," Mike stuttered. "No matter what Liz does, we're still married." "I'm sorry to have to say this to Mike," Ariana said softly. "I know you too well. You gave her chance after chance to turn back, didn't you?" He nodded. "Despite all your entreaties, she still walked away," she continued, looking at his shocked face that nearly made her heart burst. She continued in the same soothing voice, "If you sit here alone, the thought of her with another man will tear you apart, and tomorrow she'll come home, pleased with herself, and you'll be here waiting for her, betrayed, lonely, sad, and hurt. We're not gonna let that happen. You deserve better. At every turn since she started down this path, we've fought together to throw her off balance. We're not going to let you stop now." Mike looked at these two beautiful, compassionate women with tears in his eyes. "The thought of her riding towards that creep, it makes me want to puke." "We know," Ariana replied. "But this way is better. You have to accept it. It's a given now. I'm sorry, but it's still true. She's too caught up in the fantasy she's created, too invested in this weird romantic idea that you'll somehow get turned on when she tells you what other men have done to her. Too stubborn to realize she's making a huge mistake and should turn back. But will she be just as smug when she realizes that while she was just another notch, you had an amazing evening with two women? Probably not. Will it take the shine off her obsession? Will it make her reconsider if everything she does, you end up doing better? Maybe it won't, but if you do nothing and just accept her machinations, she'll have no incentive to change, and your only options will be surrender or divorce." She looked at Jasmine. "I want my daughter to have a better life than I did, and to have everything. I literally won't trust anyone to teach her, and she's had a crush on you since she was a teenager. She's 18, and I put her on the pill as soon as she was old enough, just in case. But now she wants to become a woman, and here, at this moment, you're the perfect man to help her, just as she is to help you." She smiled. "I can't believe I'm about to say this." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "Mike, Jas and I both need you." Mike got up and walked across the room as the women sat in silence. He knew that everything Ariana had said was true. Nothing he said could change his wife's mind. In a few minutes she would be with GD. She had abandoned her vows, ignored his protests, made her choice. What was he getting at? Would his wife think of him sitting alone, miserable, tormented by the imagination of her spreading her legs for another man? He looked at the mother and daughter sitting together in anxious anticipation. "Ladies, you make a compelling argument. Would you both like to join me upstairs?" The atmosphere in the cab was far less cordial. Ged's wife Sandra, GED called her our son, Liz remembered, whined almost the entire way that GED wanted her out of the house for the evening, and he would be unhappy that she hadn't succeeded in seducing Mike. She asked Liz how she was going to have fun now, while Liz and her husband were upstairs. Liz was seething for several reasons. She had spent a fortune on lingerie to show off to her new lover, only to find that this ordinary middle-aged housewife sitting in the seat next to her was wearing almost the exact same thing. In her imagination, she and Mike kissed, then broke up, then came back together to describe their feelings to each other. Instead, she found herself in the back of a cab with a whining housewife and no prospects. And if she wanted to kiss him, She'd have to rinse her mouth out first. And Mike. Okay, maybe Sandra wasn't the best publicity, but maybe if they went with other couples, sometimes the wife could be better than the husband. After all, it might have balanced things out. But Mike didn't want to engage in such a thing. He insisted on finding his own women, and Liz had to agree if she wanted to sleep with GED. But where the hell did he find those two babes? Had he cheated on me before? She'd only given him a day's notice. How the hell had he managed to arrange things so quickly? And how did he know about GED? Did he intend to ruin their relationship at work? She knew he had influence, but would he dare make himself look like a cuckold for revenge? And what the hell was GED thinking? Sending Sandra away when she'd clearly told him not to. Did he really think that was smart? Did he really do it just to piss Mike off? His stupid macho pose could have turned out badly, but he'd been so busy he'd forgotten that Mike wasn't the man to mess with. She had to take their marriage to the next level. Demonstrate trust, try new experiences, have new lovers, but still love each other. This damn fiasco was not at all what she had envisioned. Mike followed Ariana and Jas upstairs. He should have led the way, but he wanted to watch their backs as they walked. It was truly a marvelous sight. He couldn't forget that his wife intended to commit adultery tonight. The prospect that opened up before him helped take away the pain. He directed them to the second bedroom. Perhaps now they would have to give it another name. Once inside, Ariana turned to him. I want this to be unforgettable for all the right reasons, so I can't be here. It would be, she searched for the right word, inappropriate. I'll be downstairs. I can join you when you're ready. She stood on tiptoe and kissed Mike on the lips for the first time in her life, and then smacked her daughter on the cheek. Oh, you're a lucky, lucky baby, she whispered, and walked away. Jas looked at Mike with a mixture of concern and anticipation. He opened his arms and she stepped into his embrace. They held each other tightly for a minute, until he felt her relax in his arms. He ran his hands down her back, savoring the softness of her skin. Her scent mesmerized him. Jas wondered a few questions. Mike pushed her away from him, and she was wary. Had she already done something wrong? She looked up, begging for another chance, but he was smiling. He tilted his head to kiss her, and she melted into his arms. Mike pulled back slightly. She lost track of time as they stood together, until... Jas, he whispered quietly. It's time. She was insecure, afraid her body wasn't good enough for him. Too tall, too short, too fat, too thin. She stared intently into his face, looking for some sign that he liked her, and then she breathed a sigh of relief. His face said everything she needed to know. Now she took matters into her own hands. Can I? She had a hard time finishing the question. Jas, he said softly, you can do whatever you want. Anything that gives you pleasure is fine with me. I've seen pictures, even videos, but this... Mike smiled at her. As much as I'd like to claim this will be the best moment of your life, I can't. She looked at him doubtfully, but accepted his assurances. She looked puzzled, and he explained. Just follow my instructions and do what gives you pleasure. Tell me what you like and what you don't like. You won't hurt my feelings. She lay back on the pillow, and he marveled at the splendor before him. She was very much like her mother's daughter in body and appearance. Her long dark hair cascaded over the pillows. Her deep brown eyes glanced nervously from her beautiful face, with fine features. Less aristocratic than her mother's, but gorgeous in its own way. You're so, he paused, absolutely amazing. Suddenly, all her nerves were gone. He wasn't in a hurry. They had a whole night, and he intended to savor every bit of this feast. Dear viewer, I apologize for my spontaneous intrusion, but I'll be honest. In this moment, really a lot of hot material went to Patreon because of YouTube's sanctions to my channel, so you know that the link to the full version in the description. That's it. No more distractions. Have fun watching. She was no longer a little girl. She was a woman who knew what she wanted, and at this point, they started to slowly move on to the main course. Take your time, he said softly. She nodded to him and lowered herself onto him with a focused face. They both felt him touch her barrier and she paused, tears streaming down her cheeks. Look at me, he told her. and she obeyed. She had never imagined she could feel sensations like this. They were so intense she could barely breathe. Time seemed to stop for her, and she seemed frozen in one position. It was the end for Mike, too. He was only human. Then he lay down next to her. They both lay in silence, savoring the moment until she spoke. "I don't want to move out of here, but I want my mom to be with us." Mike laughed. "Ariana, come in," he called out. The door opened, and a sheepish-looking Ariana appeared on the doorstep. She had changed back into her usual clothes. "I wasn't sure," he explained to Jas. "But you were making so much noise, I was sure." She couldn't resist making sure her girl was all right. Jas sat up and reached out her arms to hug her mom. "Oh, Mom," she whispered. "I never imagined it could be like this." Ariana replied with a mixture of pride and envy. "That's exactly the impression you got. I heard you all the way down." At about this point in Ged's house, he and Liz were climbing the stairs. By a strange coincidence, Liz went first so that GED could glance at her dress and try to get his attention again. The evening hadn't started out too well. First, there was the fucking car ride with Sandra's non-stop chatter. Then GED and Sandra had a big fight over the fact that she was supposed to stay with Mike for the night. Sandra pissed Liz off by pointing out that Mike seemed to have found 2 exotic babes to console himself, and by the looks of it, he was in for a more exciting night than GED was having. Just as they were beginning to calm down a little, Sandra chided him again for being a damn dumbass and sending her off looking stupid after Liz had apparently told him that Mike wasn't interested in her. And why hadn't he told her that? And they were off again. Another 10 minutes wasted. Sandra then demanded an explanation of what she was supposed to be doing all fucking evening while he was playing with his new girlfriend. Eventually, GED gave her £20 to go to bingo, and she calmed down. GED and Liz then had to wait until our San went up to the bedroom to change. Awkwardly waiting until Sandra finally got out of the way, she looked around their house. It was awful. Bland and shabby decor, outdated wallpaper and carpets. But at least Sandra kept it clean. Liz wasn't sexist. GED considered cleaning a woman's job. Still, she didn't want to marry him, only spend evenings with him, so it wasn't her problem. Finally, Sandra's cab arrived to take her to bingo, and Liz and GED were finally alone. "Want a drink to relax before I take you to heaven and back?" muttered GED. Liz was about to refuse, but then realized that she was actually as taut as a clothesline and agreed. GED poured them both a Bacardi and a Coke, because he said he could tell she was a classy girl. Eventually, the drinks ran out, Liz's nerves calmed, and they made their way upstairs. She kept going, no matter what. This was going to happen, no matter what. They entered the bedroom, and Liz turned to him. She was pleased to see his eyes. GED was a real man, tall, muscular, confident. Not polished and suave like Mike. He was earthy and more masculine. And she deserved this opportunity after all these years. She'd been dreaming about this for weeks. "Shit," he said. "You're good." With that, they finished the first session. He stepped back and turned toward the door. "Would you like another drink?" he asked her. "It'll be about 20 minutes. He cast her a glance and went downstairs. In Mike's spare bedroom, Ariana sat at the foot of his bed, while her daughter tried to describe how she felt. Mike sat leaning against the headboard of the bed, with his arms around Jas. Ariana didn't know how she was supposed to feel being present for such a moment, but watching them together, she felt blessed that they loved her enough to let her share in their aftertaste. After a few minutes, Jas fidgeted on the bed and whispered something, which Ariana didn't catch, in Mike's ear. He smiled at her and said, "If that's what you want. Truth be told, I'd do anything for you right now." Jas bowed to him, said simply, "That's all I want," and got out of bed. "Okay, Mum," she said cheerfully. "I've warmed it up for you. Now it's your turn. I'll go sort out the kitchen while you refresh your memory. Call me when you're done," and walked away. Mike and Ariana stared after her as she walked nonchalantly out the door. "God help the students of Edinburgh," Mike said with feeling. "We may have unleashed a monster on them." He looked at his friend. "Ariana," he said softly, "I know this was your idea, but I understand if this evening seems too strange for you. Just say the word, and I'll take you home. You owe me nothing, and what's more, I owe you." She looked up at him and smiled. I admit. I was a little uncomfortable sitting downstairs while you were doing that. But, she paused, trying to describe her feelings. But she was so dazzlingly happy. How could I not be happy for her? The expression on Ariana's face changed. She left this place so I could take over. If you don't want it, that's fine. But if she thinks I turned my back when I had the chance, I'll disappoint her, and I won't do that. Mike said, "Then join me in my lair," he said in his best evil villain voice. "For this is where I work my miracles." Ariana grinned at his levity. "I'm not sure, but I wouldn't mind a good defilade if you don't mind, Wicked." Saying that, she stood up and did her business. Turning around, she saw Mike, who, leaning on one arm, was watching her. "I will," she said, slowly turning 360 degrees to face his gaze. "Well," he replied, "I could say yes, or I could just show you, whichever you find most convincing. I must say that you are indeed a beautiful woman, and I would be delighted if you would join me." Jas was fascinated by all that was going on when she arrived. She moved to a chair in the bedroom and watched quietly. "Is that what I looked like?" thought Jas to herself. "Damn, but it looks so—" She paused, as she couldn't find the words to describe it. Ariana was completely oblivious to the fact that her daughter was watching her. All of her attention was focused on something else. And damn, it felt good. There were no words. Words required too much concentration. She thought she heard someone's voice. "Ariana, I can't hold back any longer." It was a man's voice. It must have been Mike's. Jas watched intently as they both collapsed into a sweaty heap. Jas walked over to the bed and stood over them. "Please?" She looked up at him. He only smiled. And something happened that I can't say here, but she'll never forget that night, ever. Meanwhile, Gerald and Liz finished their second glass and returned to his bedroom. Liz lay down on the bed and held out her arms for GED to join her. He sat down on the edge of the bed. "I think you're ready now," he said softly. Liz didn't feel any different, but she managed to convince herself otherwise. This was what she wanted. This was the experience she had to share with Mike. If only he wasn't so stubborn. GED said a few words, and then he headed for the bathroom. Liz lay there for a while, waiting for him to return and thinking about what it had been like. Then GED came back into the room. "I never thought," he said. "I should have let you go first. Where are my manners?" "No," she replied in her most sultry voice. "I've had enough for now. Are you ready to play some more?" GED was a little surprised, but grinned. "You really are, aren't you? All right then. One more drink break and then we'll try to get one more round in before our Sand gets back from bingo." Liz rolled over onto her side. "Or we could just stay close by until you're ready again." She put emphasis on the word "next to." GED looked unsure for a moment, then gave a short, humorless laugh. "I don't. You women always want more. Who does that?" He shook his head in mock despair. "I'll see you downstairs." Liz stared in amazement, trying to comprehend what had happened. He, instead of staying and playing, laughed at her and went to get a drink. She went to the bathroom. When she finally got downstairs, Jed was already waiting for her with a drink. She had a lot of thoughts in her head, but she had promised one more time, so it was best not to get into an argument. But one thing she couldn't leave unanswered. "What do you mean when San comes back?" Now he looked uncomfortable. "Well, she was supposed to be at your place all night tonight to give your old man a proper walk. I mean, she took off to bingo to give us some space. But when she gets home, she's not likely to sleep in the spare room, is she?" "So, what the fuck am I supposed to do?" she demanded, starting to get really angry. "I told you Mike wasn't interested, but instead of finding another place for us, you sent her anyway. And that was your plan? Was that fucking everything?" She was almost incoherent with rage at his arrogance and stupidity. GED didn't like women talking to him, and he'd already gotten it from San, so he wasn't too pleased that Liz was the object of his attention either. "I told you," he replied. "We can have one more round before she gets back, and then you can have the spare room for the night. If you're not happy with that, you can just fuck off." Liz stood, paralyzed with rage and frustration. But there was no way she was going home tonight with her tail between her legs, while Mike kept the two women at home. Finally, she snapped out of her seat, turned around, and headed upstairs. As soon as she got to her bedroom, she grabbed her phone and ordered an Uber. Luckily, it was the lull period between dropping people off at late-night parties and getting them home, so she was promised to be picked up in 10 minutes. After putting on her bra, she slipped back into her dress and shoes and grabbed her bag. Thank goodness she had brought her bank cards with her. When she was dropped off, she walked down the stairs, and after wishing Jed a sincere "fuck you," she left, remembering to slam the door on her way out. Crazy bitch, Ged thought as she walked away. Nice ass, though. Mike lay staring at the ceiling, his thoughts in the air. There was no way he could get rid of the thought of his wife being with another man. On the other hand, the despair he foresaw couldn't take root. His mental wanderings were interrupted when Ariana shifted and then sat up. "Good girl," she said to her daughter. "Where did you learn that?" she asked, frowning incredulously. Jas only laughed. "I didn't learn it at all. I just really wanted to touch it, and that's what happened." Ariana paused, then sighed. "This is so fucked up, but look anyway." She looked at Mike, who stared back, challenging her with his gaze. Mike already knew how good she was, but now she wasn't demonstrating. She was showing her daughter how it was done. Mike wondered for just a second if he should comment on Ayana's actions, but decided that this was mother-daughter time, and he should lie back and enjoy the moment. "Ariana," he said in a voice, "Jas and I would be honored to have you participate." Ariana smiled and shook her head. "Lots of things we miss because of stupid YouTube." In less than a minute it was over for Jas, and her beloved mom graciously replaced her at the post. Meanwhile, Liz directed the driver into town and asked him to drop her off near the center. There, her clothes, though skimpy, were at least appropriate for young women heading out for an evening clubbing. She went into one of the larger stores, which was open until 10, and bought a cheap suitcase for the night, a change of underwear, toiletries, and leggings. After paying, she went to the bathroom and put the leggings on. Now she could at least book a hotel room without looking like a shop-worn fool. She'd managed to get a room at a hotel near the train station that belonged to a chain they'd used before, so she knew she'd be comfortable. When she reached her room, she took off her shoes, sat on her bed, and burst into tears of frustration. Everything had seemed so simple in her imagination. She wanted to spend the evening with Ged. Mike was to enjoy an evening with Sandra. And then, in the morning, they would be together again, because that was the problem. She couldn't explain to Mike why the evening would be terrific. She was just sure it would be. If he would just trust her, everything would be fine. Of course, Sandra wasn't as beautiful as the two Mike had found. In fact, she was quite demure, though willing, and if pressed, she had to admit that Ged wasn't very good-looking. But novelty aside, he was a lousy lover compared to Mike, or any man she'd ever been with for that matter. Feeling sorry for herself, she showered and crawled into her lonely bed to fall asleep. When she started to fall asleep, she wondered what Mike was doing. And then she realized she was jealous. Saturday morning, Liz woke up early. She showered again to occupy her time, then got dressed and went to the pub next door to the hotel for breakfast. She needed to be out of her room by 10, so she spent some more time watching the news on the TV in her room before checking out and heading to the nearest station to catch a cab home. She felt kind of flat. It wasn't the triumphant jubilation she had expected for so long. She was going back to her husband. She ought to have felt invigorated, smartened, enlightened, but she felt none of these things. No, she said to herself. It was all Mike and Ged's fault. If Mike had been more sensible, she might have stayed with Ged longer, and the next time would have been better. If Ged hadn't been such a jerk, they could have spent the night in a hotel, and everything would have been great. She would try to be more organized next time. Mike was awakened by a low murmur of voices, and then he felt the bed shift as one of his companions stood up. Opening his eyes, he saw the pleasant girl beside him, skipping a small scene. Jas was a woman now. Their relationship would change after this, but she didn't care because no one had a claim on Mike. He was married. They each had their own reasons for being with him, and as far as she was concerned, the only loser was Liz. Ariana came out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, and stood over them. "I'm starving," she announced. and no one's going to be able to feed me anytime soon if you shower together. So Mike, get your ass to the bathroom, and her ladyship can go in there by herself." Mike grinned, looking at his assistant. He was glad their relationship hadn't changed too much, and did as he was told. Jasmine stretched like a cat, and then looked at her mother. "Seriously, Mom, how can a woman risk losing a lover like that?" Ariana shook her head. "Honestly, I don't have a reasonable answer, dear. I know you don't have the experience to compare, but he really is that good. At university, your best bet would be to find a boy you like and teach him to be as good as Mike, because there aren't many 19-year-olds as experienced as him." Deciding they were lazy and had too much to cook, they got into Mike's car at 9:30 and drove to a small cafe bistro that was famous for its breakfast menu. When they pulled up, there was already a couple leaving, and the server cleared a table and seated them. While waiting, they studied the menu and ordered right away. Jas liked the scrambled eggs Benedict. Ariana liked the scrambled eggs with smoked salmon, and Mike insisted on the full English: sausage, bacon, black pudding, fried egg, hash browns, mushrooms, tomatoes, and baked beans, with toast. He saw the girls looking at him. "What?" he asked, looking at them innocently. "It's all because of you two. I need a lot of protein to make up for the recent losses." They all burst into laughter. When Liz got out of the cab, Mike's car was gone, but there was another car in the driveway, similar to the one that had been here the previous evening. Whose car was that, and where the hell was he? She went into the house and looked around. No one was there. The kitchen had been cleaned up. No one seemed to be sleeping on the bed, but the spare bedroom looked like it had been used. She flipped back the top cover. Her mind froze for a moment as reality hit her. With her mind, she knew that Mike had the right to do whatever he wanted with other women, but now she was faced with reality. Last night, Mike had done whatever he wanted. While she had been laughed at for suggesting that her stud might do her, Mike, oh my God. She sank heavily into the bedside chair and tried to comprehend what had happened. She was so immersed in her thoughts that she didn't hear the front door open. Mike noticed Liz's bag that she had abandoned in the hallway, but not recognizing it, realized it had to be hers. Weird, he thought, knowing she hadn't brought any bags with her. "Looks like Liz got home earlier than we expected," he said to his companions. "I know you've already stowed your bags in the car, so I'll see you on Monday," he said, looking at Ariana. He turned to Jas. "I don't know when I'll see you again, but I wish you all the best with your studies, and I won't forget our time together, ever." As he reached out to hug each of them one last time before going off to find his wife, Ariana blocked him with her hand. "Stop it! You're reacting, not thinking." He took a step back and looked at her questioningly. "Did you do something wrong?" she asked. Before he could answer, she continued. "No, I haven't. Do you feel bad that Liz found out who spent the night with you?" She saw the look on his face. "Ah, that's what it is." Mike felt himself getting defensive. "It's just that I'm so far out of my comfort zone that I have no idea how this conversation should go, so I'm quite happy to avoid it." He looked at both women in turn. "From the look on your face, I take it you said something wrong?" Ariana lowered her voice. "Look, this is your new reality, and you have to accept it. It's not like you to avoid confronting something that needs to be dealt with just because it's uncomfortable, so don't start now. Liz never introduced you to her lover, even though she was happy to put his wife in your bed, so take the initiative and just pretend." She stopped and thought for a moment. "No, you don't have to pretend anything. Just recognize that there will be other women with you and take it for granted. We're both glad she gave us a chance to be with you, and you don't seem to mind either, so accept it. And, among other things, she'll be very hurt if we all seem at ease meeting her like this, and she feels uncomfortable." He wondered. Ariana ran his office the way she did, because she understood people better than he did. His genius was to recognize her abilities and trust them. He looked at Jas to see if she agreed with him, or was uncomfortable. Her confident smirk spoke for itself. After all, she was her mother's daughter. He took a deep breath. "Hey, Liz," he called out. "We're back. Where are you?" Liz flinched at the sound of his voice. She was about to reply when she realized what he had said. "We're back. He never took the damn women with him, for heaven's sake, did he?" "I'll be down in a minute," she replied. Using the bathroom in their bedroom, she went downstairs and, following the sound of voices, made her way to the living room, where she found Mike explaining to an attractive young woman how the room's surround sound system was connected to the infotainment system, while an older but equally attractive woman looked on. The older woman seemed familiar to her. Mike finished his words and looked up. "Oh, hi," he said. "We didn't expect you back so early, or you could have come and had breakfast with us." He was amazed at how easy those words came to him. "I don't know if you remember Ariana, my date, and this is her daughter Jasmine." Both women smiled politely at her. Liz was absolutely delighted. Ariana broke into the conversation. "I'm so embarrassed," she apologized. "I would have changed the bed if I'd known you'd be home when we got back. But—" She paused and shrugged. "We weren't sure we were, done with it." She smiled at Mike. "I think it would be a bad idea to continue this now that Liz is home, so I'll go and strip the bed." She left the room and went upstairs. Liz was still floundering when Jas smiled sweetly at her. "Thank you so much for letting Uncle Mike do that." Liz shook her head silently. Uncle Mike, she thought. Jesus, that man lived most men's fantasies. Mother and daughter, hell, for 2 pence I'd have joined in myself. Mike joined in. "Well, I don't want to sound insensitive, so I'll ask. Did your evening go well? Did Ged's wife join you? When she was here, she seemed— oh, how do you put it? Oh, yes. On top of things." While Liz tried to gather her thoughts, he spoke again. "But here's the other thing. I've said this before, but you ignored me. Never, I repeat, never again will any of your men's wives show up at my door. It was cruel to her, and you insulted me." Liz was so shocked that she was glad she had a question she could answer. "It was all bloody Ged's idea. I told him you weren't interested in the swap, but the knucklehead went ahead with it anyway. I have no idea what he was thinking. I had no idea she was coming here, and I'm sorry." Ariana stopped on her way to the washing machine, holding the linens in her hands. "If it helps, Liz, you don't have to worry about your husband being alone when you entertain the gentleman. As his assistant, I already have a list of 10 other single women between the ages of 20 and 50 who will be happy to keep him company when you are visiting. If you give me a few hours' notice, I can make all the necessary arrangements." And she headed for the back room. 10 bloody women already lined up, and that's not counting these 2. Jesus, she thought. Now she understood why he wasn't interested in Sandra. "So how was your evening?" continued Mike. Liz hesitated for a moment. She'd gotten home early. She knew she wasn't glowing with satisfaction like the good teenager in front of her. She wasn't sure Mike could see the hotel bill on her card statement, and she knew he had a spy in her office. If she lied, she'd look foolish, especially if GED blabbed at work. "I had a barely acceptable evening with one cretin," she admitted. "Sandra went off to bingo, and frankly, I wish I'd gone with her." Jasmine looked sad. At first, Liz thought it was sympathy for her, but soon realized she was more concerned that Uncle Mike wouldn't be able to continue her education. The expression on Mike's face was more wary. "And what remains after your little experiment?" he asked in an even tone. He considered adding more, but decided against it. Liz tried to find an answer. "I don't know," she admitted. "I just needed to feel another man, and GED was there for me. Maybe if I hadn't been so desperate to get into his bed, I could have had a more reasoned conversation with you, and—" She waved her hand helplessly, pointing at the chaos she'd made. "The thing is," she paused to think. "The thing is, I don't think I'm over it." Jas stood up and walked to the door. "I think you both need some alone time to sort things out. I'll get Mom and we'll leave you 2 alone. But I'll see you again, Mike, before I leave for university." A few minutes later, after Ariana and Jas had said their goodbyes, Mike and Liz returned to the living room, and as they sat down facing each other, it was Mike's turn to start the conversation. "So, Liz," he began, "we need to talk." Unfortunate wishes. Chapter 3. It was the middle of a Saturday morning, and the couple sat like 2 strangers in their own living room. Ariana and her daughter Jas had gone out to leave them alone. So Liz, Mike, her husband, said, "We need to talk." Had it really only been 7 days since she'd said those very 4 words to him and started the destruction of their relationship? According to her, their lives had become routine, and they needed to reconnect by meeting other people. What she really meant was that she wanted to spend the evening with a work colleague, but knew that a friend of her husband's from the cricket club, who worked at the same car dealership, would tell Mike if he suspected she was doing something secretly. Liz looked at Mike and prepared to speak. Mike raised his hand to stop her. "No, me first." He took a deep breath. "I thought we had a happy, solid marriage. I was clearly wrong. In fact, I'm not sure we have anything left now. If you'd had a drunken night out after the office party, I might have been willing to forgive you. But this obsession of yours to spend time with Gerald has been going on for weeks, and you've even tried to portray it as fixing our relationship." Liz whimpered. "I know, Mike, but I've convinced myself that if we hang out with other couples more often, it will bring us closer together." Mike snorted. "And how do you think that works? Did you even think about me last night? If so, were you seriously picturing me sitting there thinking about your mental image? Did you? Because if Ariana and Jas hadn't stayed to keep me company, I would have just drunk myself unconscious." She couldn't help it and regretted it as soon as she opened her mouth. "You handled that well." She stopped talking abruptly when Mike glared at her. "You expect a fucking thank you?" he exclaimed in amazement. "Yes, I did, but I would have preferred to have my wife by my side. However, she preferred you-know-what herself. Ariana first came just to keep me company, and Jas told you this morning how she took advantage of the opportunity." Mike shook his head. "And you know what?" he exploded, still angry at her comment. "I still almost sent them away. Just the thought of being here alone while you're with that prick made me ask them to stay after all." He calmed down a little. "The three of us solved each of our own problems, but these women deserve better than to be a distraction for me while you're promiscuous." Liz tried again. "But Ayana said you have a list of women." Mike broke into the conversation. "She told everyone in the office about our agreement, and apparently suggested that single women let her know if they were interested in—" He tried to pick a word. "Comforting me while you expand your experience." "What, your whole office knows?" exclaimed Liz. "Is that what you made of it?" he exclaimed. "It's okay for you to sleep around, but I'm supposed to keep it a secret so I don't embarrass you?" Liz had the good sense to leave it at that. Mike looked at his watch. "My match starts in an hour, and I don't intend to be late because of this shit. I'll be back around 6, and you—" He threw up his hands in frustration. "You can do whatever you want." Liz sat in silence, pondering Mike's outburst. She finally realized how badly she had misjudged herself. If she had been honest about her concerns, they could have talked. But trying to manipulate Mike was just stupid. And GED. Jesus. The man was a goddamn dinosaur. Apparently, he was so used to seducing desperate, unhappy women that he never had to worry about being at least a competent lover. Liz understood why Sandra, Ged's wife, was willing to be with other men. She was probably getting a better evening than their unfaithful wives were getting with GED. With Mike, she would definitely get one. Liz understood that she needed to rebuild her relationship with her husband, but at the same time, she was honest enough to realize that what she had confessed to Mike was true. She couldn't get rid of her desire, and didn't understand how she could satisfy this destructive need and still be married to Mike. Damn it. After an uncomfortable Saturday night on Sunday, Liz told Mike that she was going to visit her mother for the day, and that Mike could call her on her mom's landline anytime if he wanted to make sure she was where she said she was. Mike spent most of the day at the cricket club, net and bar, and so they spent another day apart. That evening, as they sat there, trying obviously not to avoid each other, Mike had to speak up. "I think our marriage is in deep shit, but—" He took a breath before continuing, "I don't think I'm in the right frame of mind at the moment to make that decision. So I'm going to give myself at least a week to calm down. In the meantime, I suggest you consider whether there's anything here worth saving, and if there is, what the hell you can do or say to make a difference." He grabbed a book off the shelf and went to bed. The next morning, as they each got ready for work, the atmosphere was as chilly as it had been all weekend. Mike left the house as soon as he was ready, He didn't want to linger in his wife's presence any longer than necessary, and came to work noticeably earlier than usual. Those of his co-workers who came early noted the change in his habit and wondered if it was an indication that his new open marriage had begun in earnest. Ariana arrived about 10 minutes after Mike, but as was her custom, she opened her computer to see if anything urgent had come up over the weekend. After gathering her strength, she joined Mike in his office. Mike looked up from the screen as she knocked and entered. "Good morning, Ariana. Did you have a good weekend?" "Yes, thanks for asking, Mike," she grinned. "My daughter and I met up with an old friend, and he took us to places we've never been before." Mike couldn't help but smile, knowing that this mundane conversation meant nothing to their co-workers in the main office. "Close the door, please. There are a couple of questions I need your advice on." "Okay," he began. "Work first." Together, they reviewed the progress of the various projects, switching employees from work ahead of schedule to work approaching the deadline, until they were sure the employees had a clear direction for the rest of the week. When they were done, Ariana looked at her boss with concern on her face. "How did it go after we left?" she asked. "I guess I screwed up from the start," he said, humbled. "How did you calculate that?" she asked, genuinely perplexed. "It was that damn treaty." He could barely contain his anger. "I actually signed a document giving that fool permission to spend the evening with that bastard. I was surprised when you showed it to me, but assumed you had a reason." He sighed. It made sense at the time. Liz said something to the effect that if we both agreed to do it with other couples, then, and this is the important part, the part that made me react the way I reacted, we wouldn't have to cheat. It was at that point that it became obvious that she fully intended to be with someone else, and if I refused to realize that, she would just do it behind my back. The agreement was just a reaction that was supposed to give me more opportunity to change her mind. "And look what happened," he added bitterly. Ariana understood his reasoning, so she nodded and asked, "Have you decided what you're going to do next?" He leaned back in his chair and looked up at the ceiling as if searching for inspiration. "I see only 3 options. I can do nothing and accept that my marriage is the way it is now. I can try to work through it and see if counseling can convince her to give up this obsession. Or, and I think this is inevitable, will divorce." "Can I ask something very personal?" hesitantly said Ariana. Mike looked at her in amazement. "After what we pulled 2 days ago, you're afraid to ask a personal question? Jesus, I'm almost afraid to ask what it is. Do you still love her?" she said simply. "You know?" he replied. "I can't look at her. I can't bear to be with her. She betrayed me, and I know I should hate her, but hell." His voice lowered. "Yes, I think I still love her." "Did you tell her about it?" she asked quietly. Meanwhile, Liz arrived at the dealership at her usual time, not knowing what to expect from GED, and sure enough, there he was, giggling with his buddies as she walked in. She was a little surprised by the colder-than-usual reception from the other women in the office. Surely GED wasn't bragging in front of them. She then went into the small break room to make herself a drink, and saw a new notice on the board. It was their contract with her fucking signature at the bottom, written in marker. Where the fuck had that come from? Shocked, she headed to her desk to get to work, but then her boss intercepted her and invited her into his office. "Is your new marital status going to be a problem?" he asked. She shook her head tiredly. "As far as I know, no one here knew anything about it. All I can assume is that I left a copy of the agreement with my husband on my desk, and someone found it, copied it, and posted it on the board to embarrass me." "Very well," he said. "It doesn't concern me as long as it doesn't affect business. As soon as it does, I will take action. Is that clear?" She nodded, and he dismissed her. About an hour later, the new temp walked past Liz's desk and into the break room, giving Liz a sympathetic smile. GED soon followed, smirking after her. A moment later, there was a squeal, and a young female voice shouted, "Get your filthy hands off me, you dirty old pervert!" The whole office heard and fell silent. Then, all the women and most of the men rushed to the door. Liz heard Ged's voice, "Give up that innocence. You were asking for it." Liz closed her eyes and shook her head. If he apologized, there would be hope for him. The women who worked there, would leave in droves if he kept his job after this. Mike was busy preparing a bid for a major new contract when the phone rang. He answered it. It was James from the cricket club, Liz's boss. "Mike, do you have a minute to chat? She's had some things happen that you should know about." Mike felt sick to his stomach. "Is Liz okay?" he asked. "She's fine, Mike," came the reply. "I'm sorry. Maybe I should have started with that." Mike relaxed. "Okay, I'm listening to you. Okay, this is going to sound like a soap opera, but it's been my fucking day so far. I came in this morning and found an open prenup with your name pinned in the staff room. I assume it's real?" "Yes, it is," Mike confirmed. "I thought so. That explains our conversation last week. I suppose GED was behind it somehow?" "As far as I can tell," Mike said. "Apparently he went through just about every desperate older woman in your house and finally hit on Liz, and that slumbering fool fell for it." "Well, something has clearly gone wrong. There was no love lost between them this morning, so this fool seems to have decided to direct his attention to our mutual friend as the next conqueror. Nothing good came of it." "Is she all right?" "Certainly better than GED," James snorted. "That stupid bastard told one of the guys that she had a gag reflex before he followed her into the staff room. Perhaps, in retrospect, he shouldn't have said that to a decent young man with 2 younger sisters. Anyway, Scott was about to intervene when Eliza made her feelings, shall we say, loudly known. Nothing GED said afterward helped. He basically called her a tease, and in front of an entire group of women. I think I did him a favor by firing him on the spot before they lynched him." Mike interrupted. "James, you didn't fire that bastard because of me, did you?" "God, no. That's not why I called. I fired him because he was an asshole and he deserved it. No, I'm embarrassed to admit that I intend to give his job to Liz to make Eliza permanent." "I still don't understand what the problem is," Mike said. "Oh, okay," James replied. "Neither of us will shed a tear for GED, but I wasn't sure how you would feel about me promoting Liz, so I thought it was only fair to tell you. I just know she'll do the job just as well as GED, and I won't have to spend time and money on outside help." Mike thought for a moment. "No matter how Liz and I pair up, we can't be allowed to influence how you run your business. You have to do things the way you see fit. Nevertheless, I appreciate you letting me know. By the way, please thank Elise for her help. I'll give you a small thank you gift to give the next time you see her." The rest of the day went relatively smoothly for both of them. In the morning, Liz put the cassoulet on the boil, and when Mike came home, the house was filled with the wonderful aroma of red wine and herbs. They agreed to eat together in the kitchen, and Mike poured 2 large glasses of wine, while Liz filled 2 bowls and sliced a baguette. Mike complimented Liz on the food, and decided to be frank with her. "I think it's only fair to tell you that James called me today. He told me what happened with Gerald, and I want you to know that the decision to fire that idiot was entirely James. I'm not going to pretend I'm sorry, but it wasn't revenge on my part." "You know what?" said Liz, taking a sip of wine. "I'm not sorry either. He smirked at me just before he tried to grope the poor girl. I honestly think that scumbag was trying to make me jealous. I went and apologized to her and asked her to lunch." She set her fork aside, put her elbows on the table, rested her chin on her hands, and stared at her husband. "That's when she told me she was the one who reported to you." Mike continued to eat. Finally, he spoke up. "I was planning on giving her a couple hundred for her efforts. Now, since she blabbed to you, I think I'll give her 400. The girl has a conscience, and that should be rewarded." Liz told Mike how events had unfolded that morning, and gave him a meaningful look when she told him about the contract pinned to the bulletin board. Eliza admitted that she had left it in the copier, but she hadn't pinned it. Liz also told him how she had stopped the other guy from hitting GED. Young Scott seemed to have a crush on Elise, and it was him, not GED, who had been smiling at her that morning. They filled their glasses and moved into the living room. Mike took a sip and asked the question he dreaded the answer to. "Ariana asked me how our conversation went after she left us. I told her that getting you to sign the agreement was a mistake. Was it? Did I give you permission to be with GED, or would you have done it regardless?" Liz looked at her husband and saw the grief and guilt in his eyes. It wouldn't have happened, but while he and I were working together, he tried to get into my soul, and I suspect I would have given in eventually. She looked thoughtfully into her glass. I'll say that as an explanation, not an excuse. GED was nothing like you. He was tall, confident, or arrogant if you prefer, muscular, and had real charm when he wanted to. He was older than me, and clearly only interested in a one-night stand, not a relationship in any way. She took a sip of wine and looked at her husband. Mike leaned back in his chair and listened as she continued. He convinced me that an evening with him would be amazing because he's so rich and experienced. I also let myself believe that you would get so excited at the thought of being with another woman that you would let it happen. Liz relaxed a little as she confessed. I resisted at first, for a few weeks. But then I admitted to myself that I was curious, that it would be exciting, and the opportunity was in front of me, and all I had to do was convince you. By the time I actually brought it up with you, I'd been thinking about it for a couple months, and I had a grand plan. You and me with great pairings, sharing, and... She stopped and took another drink. And it was all a complete fucking fantasy. GED was a loser. Sandra is a stultified, battered housewife, desperate for a decent man. Neither of them the type to dream of. The sad thing is that I, supposedly an intelligent grown-up woman, allowed this half-wit to tempt me into cheating on my husband. She looked at Mike. I have to ask, are you with Ariana? He managed to smile. In 10 years, I haven't even pecked you on the cheek. I think you knew that yourself. Liz smiled as well. Yeah, I never thought you'd be so obvious about spending the night with your secretary, even if she looks like Ariana. And her daughter. Oh my God, she's just as stunning as her mother. You know, you looked so at ease with both of them that morning. Tell me honestly, was it that awful? Mike shook his head. No, it was far from horrible. But you have to realize that they were only there for me because you weren't. If you had been in our bed instead of Ged's, life would have gone on and I would have been content. Liz studied her glass, contemplating what to say next. Can I ask a favor? Mike's raised eyebrow would have impressed even Ariana. Intriguing. And what would that favor consist of? There are actually several parts to it, some big, some less so, but please think carefully before you answer. Mike nodded and leaned back in his chair. She finished her wine and set the glass on the table. She turned to her husband. Please, can I be your wife until you find someone else? You can dictate the terms of our marriage, and I won't contest our divorce when you're ready. But there's no reason for both of us to be lonely and miserable until then. Mike was stunned, but decided to hear her out. She continued. Thank you for not laughing out loud. I know it must have come as a shock, but I meant what I said. My next request is that you think about whether you will ever be able to have a nice evening in bed with me again. Mike again resisted the temptation to respond. He agreed to think about her questions, but these ones were profound. She smiled, seeing his confusion. I'm not sure how you'll feel about that. She took a deep breath. Please ask Ariana to find a woman to stay with you this weekend as we agreed. Seeing his expression turn rigid, she raised her hand. No, you have my word. I'll be here alone while you're gone. I've been horrible to you and I deserve to experience the same things I was willing to subject you to. Mike frowned. I'm not the one manipulating you. She paused. Or maybe I am, but until you're ready to do this with me, you need someone to give you pleasure. I told you you could dictate terms, and I meant it. Is that it? He asked. Because that's a lot to think about. There's something else, she replied. When I asked you to consider whether you could do this with me, I meant what you did before. I feel soiled knowing that the last man I was with was GED. Please take me back. Make me yours again, any way you want. Use me however you want, if it gives you pleasure. Please don't let him be the last man to touch me. Mike struggled to think of any coherent answer. Meanwhile, Liz sat in silence as he considered her words. Finally, he said, I guess I really asked you to think about what you could do or say to save our marriage. I admit, you surprised me. She waited for him to continue. Your first 2 questions will have to wait until the pain subsides a bit. If I try to answer now, it will be too soon. As for the rest, I don't know if I'm ready for a casual evening with other women the way you suggest. And your idea of me bringing you back to myself? He struggled to find the words to reply. Without a word, Liz left the room and went upstairs. She returned 5 minutes later in her robe. She carefully placed the things she had brought with her on the table in front of Mike's chair. She looked Mike in the eye. "Do whatever you want." She stood before him, offering herself as atonement for her betrayal. Her husband was at a loss. It had never occurred to him that they would ever be lovers again. But his answer to Ariana's question that he still loved Liz echoed in his mind, followed by Ariana's reply, "Did you tell her that?" Mike looked helplessly at the woman standing before him. "You can't be serious. Are you just trying to say something?" Liz looked at him with grim determination on her face. "If you do this, even just to please yourself, I'll like it." Mike visibly paled as he listened to her pleas. "I'm sorry, but I'm not," he stammered. She spoke furiously. "I told you I didn't put up with it. I realize now how stupid it was. It was a fantasy, a fiction. I don't deserve the loving husband I betrayed. Teach me a lesson, Mike. I still won't fight you when you divorce me for someone more deserving. But while I'm still your wife, take your woman away from GED. Do it for me, please, Mike." She got up and walked to the dining room, where she stood motionless, waiting for him to follow her. He too stood up as if in a dream and joined her. She looked at him expectantly. He took the cord and wrapped it around her wrists, tying them together. Mike looked at the table next to her. "Liz, stop this, please. I can't. Ariana asked me if I told you I still love you. I do, and I can't bring myself to hurt you like this," he said softly. "Please, Mike," she begged. "Even if you've already decided to kick me out, even if you decide to divorce me tomorrow, please do it. Even if this is the last time you touch me, do it. Please, I'm begging you, Mike." It seemed to him that he was watching a stranger. It could not be that his voice, full of resentment, was shouting, "I told you I'm not interested in your cheesy plans." Liz couldn't hold back her tears any longer and burst into tears. "I loved you so much, but you dressed like a fool and smiled as you fancied yourself for him," he said painfully. Again and again, the belt came down until it stopped. He stepped back and looked at her, trying to realize what he had done to her. After that, he took the game completely into his own hands. Only a few moments later, he spewed all of his power out of her. He recoiled, shocked. Then his senses returned to him. He helped her up. She clung to him as he carried her upstairs. She couldn't sit up, and he gently helped her onto the bed in the spare room, the same one. "Thank you," she whispered through her tears. "Will you help me move my stuff in here tomorrow?" He didn't understand. "Why?" "I'm sorry," she cried, "but I'm in too much pain to do this now." Finally, he realized. "Hell no." He stroked her hair. "I only put you here so I could bathe and heal your back. I don't want our bed to get wet. As soon as we're done, I'll put you to bed, our bed." He hurried downstairs to get a bowl, and then into the bathroom to fill it with warm water and grab a soft washcloth and aloe vera cream. Liz wrinkled her nose as he washed the damaged skin, and again as he gently rubbed the cream into the wounds. "I'm really, really sorry," he apologized. "I don't even know what it was." "It was an exorcism, and only you could perform it," she said. "There was something inside me, this restlessness, and it needed to be quenched. I love you when you're my loving husband, but I needed another you, a passionate, possessive man, to reclaim what was his. Thank you for showing me that you care." Mike looked at his watch. It was still early evening, but he went downstairs once more to get her a glass of water and a painkiller and turned off the light, returning to her. He helped her to the bathroom and held her. When she finally settled into their bed, he lay on his back and wondered, did they have a future? 4 weeks later, Liz showed her husband the report she had just gotten from her general practitioner. The results of the STD swabs were clean. Mike refused to even think about asking Ariana to find him a partner for the evening until he was sure that Liz hadn't given him the infection she'd picked up from GED. She hadn't. He was a little surprised at her enthusiasm, for they had started spending evenings together again while they waited for the results. Liz offered it to him every night, any way he wanted, and was honest enough to admit that she enjoyed doing it with him, even if it wasn't as enjoyable as they were used to. And then, one night, it happened. A guy at work was talking about how she was with GED and then stole his job by getting her little girlfriend to lead him around by the nose. Liz had held a grudge all day, but when she got home, she lost it. She burst into tears to the point that it took Mike almost an hour to realize what had really happened. It broke his heart that she was suffering so much because of what GED had done himself, and he hugged her while she sobbed. They both felt something change. Mike realized that he needed to comfort her, and Liz realized that he still felt something for her. They snuggled into each other and kissed for the first time since she'd left to meet GED. Liz let Mike lead her upstairs to their bed and stroked his hair, and slowly they moved on to kissing. Eventually, they both finished their sharing and lay on the bed. They were doing it, and they both realized that something between them had died. They fell asleep that night, pressed against each other, each mourning their loss. The next day, Liz called Ariana at work and offered to tell Mike that she had another woman for his bed. One evening, 2 months after that phone call, Mike and Liz were having dinner when they heard the doorbell ring. Mike went to go in, but 2 police officers were on the doorstep. They were investigating an assault and wondered if Mike could help. He invited them into the kitchen, offered them tea, and sat down to listen to them. "Do you know Gerald Dixon?" one of them asked. Mike looked at Liz. "That's Ged's full name," she said. "Oh. In that case, officer," he replied. "I know of him, but we've never met." "Well," said the other cop, 2 nights ago he was beaten badly, and your name was mentioned as someone who might have wished him harm." Mike looked thoughtful. 2 nights ago, so it was Monday? The policeman nodded. "We had dinner guests that night, a young couple who work with my wife. They arrived around 6:30 and left at 11. Does that help?" The cop made a note. "From the looks of it, your wife may have been involved with Mr. Dixon. Is that so?" Mike went to the office and came back with the contract. "We have an open marriage. We both signed this document before my wife met Mr. Dixon. In fact, that same evening, Mrs. Dixon showed up on my doorstep as an unwanted victim. I sent her away as I already had 2 ladies who had agreed to spend the night with me. To tell the truth, my wife thought he was a bad lover, so she had more reason to dislike him than I did." The policeman looked at Liz. She shrugged her shoulders. "It's true. He gave the impression of being a real ladies' man, but that was just talk. Since he left, the other women in the office and some of the men have been telling stories about him being a complete sodomizer. So the number of cuckolded men who might actually want to hurt him is not something to think about. And as for Mike's involvement, if one of Ged's buddies at the car dealership said it, they want to get to me anyway, because I got his job when he screwed up, not one of his buddies." After the police officers left, obviously satisfied, Mike looked at Liz and said, "Isn't it lucky that Scott and Eliza came to dinner that night?" "Yes, Mike," she replied. "But if I remember correctly, it took you 2 hours just to pick out a good wine from the rack in the garage?" Mike smiled. 18 months later, Mike and Ariana got engaged. Mike got engaged to Denise and Ariana got engaged to Terry. Denise was part of Ariana's night crew. A pretty divorced woman with grown children, she and Mike hit it off immediately on their first date. Terry had just opened a business in a neighboring building and asked her to recommend a cleaning lady. Ariana went to make the recommendation, and he invited her out for a drink after work. The next morning, she did a walk of shame, showing up at the office in good spirits and in yesterday's clothes. Mike and Ariana managed to have one more night out before they met their new partners. Both agreed that it had been great, but they were better off being friends and colleagues. Mike also managed to see Jazz before she left for Edinburgh. He took her out to lunch before she went to meet her new boyfriend. They were never really that close together again. And Liz, she and Mike are still close. He found her a nice apartment in one of his buildings, and she's doing well at the dealership. She's seeing someone now, and she told him her story. This time she promised that when they need to talk, it will be before she decides to do something stupid. So, well, this story has come to its logical conclusion. So we have a couple, Mike and Liz. They decided that their relationship was getting boring and started all sorts of experiments. Liz arranged a date with a coworker in an attempt to spice up her life. This, however, led to a bigger crisis, as Mike couldn't forgive the cheating. At the same time, Mike organized his dates with the help of friends, which caused more confusion. From this, we can learn that honesty and openness are important in a relationship, and manipulating feelings can lead to destruction. Mike decides to take a break from the relationship to think. From this, we can learn that taking time to think helps to avoid hasty decisions. Liz realizes her mistakes and offers to get back into the relationship. However, something about them dies. After intrigues at the office where Mike comes under suspicion, they do avoid serious problems. Finally, after a few months, they realize that it is better to remain friends, and from that, we realize that reevaluating relationships and making tough decisions can lead to happiness. So, the main lesson: openness, honesty, and sometimes it's important to reevaluate your relationship to find true happiness. Good luck in life and love, my dear viewer.